Hi, I'm BNEWS Producer Sydney Boles, and we are coming up on the end of another calendar year. We're wrapping up 2023 and heading into 2024, and we're going to take the opportunity to look back on the year that was here in Burlington and look forward to the year ahead, talk about the most important stories that have been shaping our town and what we're all going to be paying attention to next year. Typically, you would have seen Phil Gallagher in this role. He couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to do my best to fill in, and I'm joined, of course, by Town Administrator Paul Sagarino. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sydney.
Is it weird? Does it feel weird to you to have it not be Phil?
A little bit. He usually opens up with a good question about the Celtics, but we'll move on to like more important town business.
I don't know if we're more important than the Celtics, but it's not my area of expertise, so we'll skip it. But I will start with, give me your big picture. What was the story of 2023 for you? What's this year been about?
I think for me, it's probably been mostly about water, and I know that's probably one of the topics we'll cover, but we had a couple big water milestones with the MWRA project, and we were able to handle the PFAS situation in 2023, both within about a couple weeks' time of each other, so that was really kind of hectic and really cool at the same time.
What's different now? What have we achieved with the completion of those projects?
With the MWRA project, we still have one more phase to go, but what we've done is we've provided the town with a really good, reliable source of water. So between the MWRA connection and the mill pond being perfectly functional, we can serve the town's needs for the immediate future. We were running on a really tight rope in terms of having enough water to serve the town over the past few years with the issues at the Vinebrook plant. So with the connection with the MWRA, we're confident that we can provide water to all the residents and the businesses for the foreseeable future. And again, we do have one final phase of the project that will, really protect the town well into the future. So.
Can you be a little more specific about that final phase?
Yeah, it's phase 2B. So the current connection allows for the town to get approximately 3 million gallons per day from the MWRA. And once we complete this last connection, which is essentially would be from Adams Street down the Middlesex Turnpike approximately to the Mall Road, we should have the ability to get 6 million gallons per day from the MWRA. So that would cover us in the event that the mill pond needed to be taken offline, even on our busiest summer water, hot heat wave days. We would be able to provide all the town's water from the MWRA pipe. So that's why I think it's important. It's a redundancy. God forbid, if something happened at the mill pond plant, we would still be in good shape.
Or if something happened to the MWRA itself, right? Again, knock on wood, but that redundancy was kind of a key word, it seemed like.
It was a huge part of the project, and it was part of the decision to maintain the mill pond. It's a relatively modern plant, and there has been occasions when the MWRA has had disruptions to service due to various issues over the years, and to have the ability to make our own water at the mill pond, I think gives the town a lot of flexibility going into the future. You could determine which is the cheaper water to make. You can make decisions like that. MWRA can be used so you can shut down the mill pond for upgrades and regular maintenance and cleaning, where before we had to really pay a lot of attention to scheduling that. So around the water usage, so we would typically have to wait to the winter when the usage was lower. So I think the town has a lot of options for water. The water's it's excellent water. It's great for a lot of the life sciences companies that are looking to relocate here, and it's obviously it's just a great milestone for the town to just know that how important water is. We certainly all realized that over the past decade or so, given all the problems we've had with water, but just to have a reliable source of water well into the future, I think will serve the town well.
How would you characterize the work of the DPW on these projects?
They've been amazing, and again, these are long projects. I mean, the MWRA started so many years ago, and under John Sanchez, and so he was the architect of it. And again, there was so many administrative hurdles just to get to the point where we're at construction. I mean, we built a line from Arlington to the edge of the town of Burlington on Adams Street, but believe it, the construction part was, believe it or not, one of the easier parts of it. The administrative hurdles and the Water Resources Committee and all the different boards, and steps that we had to take to get there administratively was really, over the previous years, was quite a challenge as well.
I want to ask about some other water-related, sewer-related stuff that's going on, and if this is sort of like more Brian White, the DPW head's bailiwick, like that's, we can leave that there. But there has been some work going on with the sewers this past year as well, sort of an effort to replace something that was going under Cambridge Street, I think, and some lining stuff that I don't know as much about as I should. What's the status of those projects this year?
Well, I think every resident who's had a sewer backup would realize sewer pipes are very important for us to keep them maintained, to keep them functional. Once you put a sewer pipe in, it really does have a very long, useful life. I think many of the pipes in the town are 40, 50, 60, maybe even 60 years old. So this is not infrastructure that's visible to the naked eye,
Right.
where you look at a building and say, hey, that needs to be replaced. It's all underground. We do a lot of work to sort of send cameras down there to understand, what work needs to be done. And we want to continue to maintain a program where we're continuously investing in that infrastructure so that over time we're replacing the whole system of pipes. And I think we've made a lot of effort on pump stations over the past few years. So that I think we're down to our last 2 pump stations to be completely renovated and retrofitted for energy efficiency. And again, these stations are 30 years old. So we just want to make sure that system works so that when residents flush their toilets, they don't have an issue. And the town DPW has done a great job of that. One of the other projects that we work on continuously is to ensure that water doesn't get into the sewer system. So that that's difficult to do when you're talking 50 miles, hundreds of miles of sewer pipes under the ground. Every drop of water that gets into the system is sent through the MWRA treatment plant the town pays to treat. So we'd rather have them treating raw sewerage as opposed to
Right.
rainwater or discharges from somebody's sump pump or things of that nature. Because it's pretty costly to treat it, so we want to make sure that it's just the stuff that needs to be treated.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what the relationship is here, but we're recording a couple of days after we had a pretty significant rainstorm in town in late December here, where there was some real flooding down by like the Shaw's Market, the Dunkin' Donuts there. I don't know if that's something that, I'm new in town. I don't know if that's something that is related, if that's something that's new, what the level of concern is about that level of flooding around.
The town has historically had a lot of issues with water. There's a lot of low-lying areas. Its town's pretty flat in a lot of areas as well. So when we have a major rain event, there's literally nothing that can be done. In many cases, the drainage system is below the stream level, so
Yeah.
it's below the water level in the streams. The water's not going to drain under any circumstances. It's just really not possible. From what I can see, a lot of it sort of clears up relatively
Right.
quickly after these flooding events. I know the Common looked like a lake during that storm.
Well, I
this
learned
week.
from Robert Fahey over at Burlington Retro that used to be the town pond, they called it, before the gazebo was there. People used to skate, which is kind of fun.
Someone mentioned the exact
Yeah.
same thing to me this morning,
Yeah.
and I was completely unaware of that as well. But there's definitely some areas of town that suffer from water issues. There are some neighborhoods that were built, pretty much in a floodplain.
Yeah.
Prior to environmental laws and things like that being in place, such as today, that would prevent somebody from building a house in those areas. And we do experience flooding, specifically during the significant rain
Yeah.
events like that.
Let's shift focus a little bit to some capital projects, from public works to buildings and stuff. We have got so many buildings underway, so many investments that are on the docket, and this year has been a major year for progress, conversations around 3 specific projects: the Fox Hill project, the high school project, and the police station project. How do you prioritize those in your brain right now, understanding that this is one moment in time, next month might be different? How are you holding those three projects in your mind?
Well, those 3 projects have been contemplated for years. As the administration, we work with the school department every year clearly the town cannot afford all of these things exactly when folks want them. I feel like we can afford them all over time. And, you know, when you tell somebody that that project is 10 or 15 years out, it seems like a long way away. But really, in the history of the town's going to been around for hundreds of years. We hope that it's around for hundreds more. That's like a year in a person's life. When you say, hey, we're not going to be able to replace that building for 10 or 15 years, it's actually quite quick when you look at the lifespan of a town. So I think as long as we're very thoughtful about how we take on those projects, and we take them on over time, when we don't take on too much debt at once, I do believe that the town can afford everything on its plate over time. So that then you get to the key point of how they're slotted in. So we've been planning for a new school building and a new police station for many years. So these were the projects that 10 years ago were 10 years out on the schedule, and people were like, oh my God, 10 years, how can we wait 10 years for these projects? And now that time has arrived. So high school project, again, that's going to be a different animal just due to the size and the scope of it.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm confident that as long as we're prudent about how we go about it, that we can do all these projects again over time. And when I say time, I don't mean like a year. I mean over time. And most folks that work in this municipal environment, we get accustomed to projects being 5, 7, 10, 15 years out. I know typical residents, they think more like their own lives, and they say 15 years out, that is a lifetime. But again, in the history of the town, that's a very short period of time. And again, I feel like that we can do all the projects that the town contemplates, as long as we're very thoughtful about the timing and when we take them on.
I want to talk about each of the three projects a little bit individually, and I think the one that was sort of the most there was the most progress, I think, was the Fox Hill project. The high school building committee and the police station building committee are both newer, so we'll touch on those later. But Fox Hill, the committee has been around for a little bit. There was a lot of work with the MSBA to submit preliminary plans, to do some preliminary finance stuff, figure out those early numbers. And just a couple of days ago, as of this taping, the committee voted to submit the PSR, the preliminary schematic report.
Yes.
I think that's it, to the MSBA. So that's exciting. That's real measurable, tangible progress on a specific timeline. How would you characterize, as someone who's on that committee, how would you characterize the work of that committee over the last year?
Oh, they've done a lot of work. And, unlike a lot of projects, there were a lot of different options available for that project. So that made their job, the committee's job, a lot more difficult. There was a lot of, differing views on how the town would proceed. The committee worked really hard, came to a conclusion, and now we're all working together to move forward the best project we can to bring to the town. So again, that's a long time coming. We've had this school building on our debt planning for 15 years. It's just one of those, it's how you're getting old, because the stuff that was way out there when you were working with it 15 years ago, and now it's coming to fruition. You kind of reminds you how long you've been around here.
Yeah. I want to ask a little bit of a tougher question, and I feel like there were a couple of points throughout this year where I felt like part of the story was about communication. There was a study from the Collins Center that found there was sort of a fractured communication environment with the town. They were suggesting there could be more like centralized communication. And I feel like there was also a moment, maybe in the summer-ish, where it felt like all of a sudden the town, residents of the town, had this moment of like, oh, there's a conversation about maybe combining Fox Hill and Pine Glen. That feels like a big deal. We should be talking about that. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how the communication has gone with the public around that process, and if you learned anything from the Collins Center report on what is going well and maybe where some improvement could be made.
Well, I don't think the results of the Collins Center report were much of a surprise. I think that we're like a lot of communities. We don't have any resources allocated for communication. So, some departments, if they have programs, and think rec, library, they're really good with their social media. I think it plays into sort of what they do as a department. But the rest of the departments, we don't have any resources allocated to that, and departments are providing information in a lot of the old-fashioned ways on the website and whatnot, but not every department head is a social media expert or a communications expert. So I know being in charge during the pandemic, you know, you really realize how important those resources are, even to just try to write something that's thoughtful and coherent under short, you know, with short time frame is a really difficult thing to do, you know. And again, I think that, you know, communication is just something it's on the menu of items. If the residents would like to, for the town to communicate better, then we really need to, you know, provide more resources for that. And again, there's a lot of competing needs in the town, and it's never seemed to rise to the top, you know, from where I'm sitting, just in terms of providing those resources. So I think clearly the report doesn't tell us anything that we didn't already know, that if you're willing to provide resources to pay somebody to handle communications, you know, you can be a pretty good communicating town. But if you don't want to provide the resources, again, I think it's a lot to put on the individual departments. I can speak to it that, you know, they're already working their full amount of hours, and, you know, we really do try to communicate important information, but, you know, I don't think that we always do it in the ways that are, you know, maybe the most modern ways that people are getting their information at this point in time. You know, we're a little bit old-fashioned with cable, you know, with newspaper, you know, with websites, which I'm told are not exactly a high level of communication at this point in time, you know, compared to other mechanisms.
And the Fox Hill Committee has a website. There's folks can access that. FoxHillBuildingProject.com is where that's at. So there is information out there. I think it's, you know, it's a matter of.
I feel like we have all the information there. It just maybe just isn't, you know, shot out to where people would be looking for it. You know, and from a resident standpoint, the information's there. You know, as you know from our calendar, all our meetings are posted, and, you know, there's a reason for that, so that the public can get involved. So on some level, I do think that people are really busy, and, you know, sometimes local issues are just not at the top of their priority list. You know, they're very busy raising families, working multiple jobs, and, you know, it becomes difficult, and they need to prioritize what they spend their free time on. And, you know, if we can make it easier for them to access information, I think that would be a good thing. But again, it really would take a financial commitment and resources from town meeting to say, hey, we'd like to see this position, and we'll be all over it.
So the two other building projects, the high school and the police station. The high school's a little bit new, and the conversation is kind of just about finding the team that we're going to be working with, the owner's project manager, the design firm. Do you have any thoughts on how that process has been going over the last year? What's been your assessment?
No, I feel like that's a little ways away, that project, so I haven't been focused quite as much on that. I think that they're going to be looking at some creative options as to how to do the high school. I think you know, some folks have floated, you know, possible $400 million. It's just
it's bonkers money.
It's crazy. So, you know, I've talked to Superintendent Conti many times over the years, and I know that he has a very creative sense of multitude of different ways to sort of address the high school issue, and I think that he's willing to be super creative, and, you know, I'm confident that they're going to start at least scratching the surface of what are some of the options, whether it's renovate some, build some new, you know, try something completely different, buy an office building for classrooms. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas that could come out of that committee's work.
I mean, so you mentioned a big number, $400 million. That's sort of the higher end of what the town is speculating this could be. Super rough, but it is in this ballpark that's really big and scary. And for context, I think the town's spend on the Fox Hill project is going to be roughly high 70 million. Is that about right?
I think it may even be in the 60s.
Okay, so those are being finalized, fine-tuned as we get further. The estimation for the average taxpayer's increase per year when these projects are on the books has been around $292. Again, that's flexible. There might be some changes there. But when you add together the Fox Hill project, the high school project, does that start to worry you? Is there an intention to stagger those so they're not happening at the same time?
They have to be staggered. I mean, there's no other way to do it. Like I say, the Fox Hill and the police have been in the plan for a while.
Yeah.
The Fox Hill and the police station. Both of those are would be the largest projects that we've ever done. I think we've talked before that I think to date the DPW project is about $34 million was the largest project that the town has undertaken, and both the police station and the Fox Hill will be significantly more than that. So I just think we need to be thoughtful. You know, the high school, one thing that we can say is good, and you guys are here in the high school. The building's been extremely well maintained, very strong construction. I know that there's a lot of deficiencies within the building with the HVAC system and the science labs, and it's not particularly appealing to the eyes, but it's very well constructed, and the school department's done a great job of maintaining it, which I think has hurt us with, you know, the MSBA. You know, they come out and take a look at the building and say, oh, it's really not that bad, you know. So, but it's going to have to be very thoughtful. It's a future project, and I mean, I don't see that project anywhere in the immediate future for us right now, other than to sort of chart a course to the future and just figure out how we may do that, how we can stagger it. Can we do it in phases? I think that'll be a big part of the high school building committee's work.
One of the questions that I think is lingering over, for me at least, I'm curious if it's something that you're worried about, is that Burlington historically has not had a great track record with debt exclusion votes. Town meeting has not traditionally voted, or I'm sorry, the electorate has not voted to approve those kinds of Proposition 2.5 override stuff. What's your thought process around potentially knowing that we're going to need to talk to voters about approving that kind of a spend?
Well, I wouldn't say that the town has a bad track record. I just think that the town hasn't had to present these options to the voters in, I think, close to 30 years. Debt exclusion votes pass approximately 90% of the time across the Commonwealth. So if you're going to build a building in another town, this is how it's done.
Yeah.
And they pass 90% of the time. I think residents and taxpayers are very shrewd and astute. And I think the percentage goes up the second time. So if a question were to fail, you bring it back the second time, and the percentage is even higher. So we need to count on our residents understanding that we need to invest in the community. I think we can make that message and make a good, solid argument for both of these projects. You mentioned the $292. You know, without being disrespectful, I mean, that's a bargain on the resident side of things. I mean, you really need to consider the business side of the equation on that. They're picking up, you know, 60% of the freight. And really, you know, you may argue it's going to get no use out of the school. But I do think that our residents, nobody wants to raise their own taxes, but I think people are very thoughtful when it comes to investing in the town. And I think our Burlington residents have shown that throughout the years. They've been very supportive of town finances for many years. And again, it's not going to be easy. Whenever you're asking somebody and giving them an option to raise their own taxes, some people are going to say no. But I do think that we have a compelling case, and I do think that the majority of residents do appreciate the services that the town provides, and do understand that you need to invest in these big ticket items over time. We have people to provide the services, and sometimes we need to invest in the facilities in order to provide those services.
Yeah.
So.
Final question before we move on to another topic. The police station building committee. You and I actually just came from, I think it was the second, is that right? The second meeting just before this. How would you characterize the first couple meetings? Again, this is super preliminary, just beginning, but what's the vibe?
They've been great. I think historically on the town side of things, which is different from the school side because there's no state agency that funds town buildings. So, you know, we don't have that same, let's just say, regulations that the schools are following to access the state money. So typically the town hasn't had a building committee for a town building until we get approved by a town meeting. So we've sort of gone without a committee, but I think what's different about the police station is, you know, as everybody knows, we want to do the police station where it currently sits. The building is a historical building, and, you know, we're looking to use a portion of the field next door. So from my standpoint,
sculpture park site,
yes. From my standpoint, you know, with some of those moving pieces, I felt like it was important to get a building committee going sooner than we normally would for a town building. So this is a little bit of uncharted territory for us, but I do want everybody to have input in the various aspects of it, before we bring it to town meeting, as opposed to, the DPW building. We sort of knew where it was going to go. We knew what those sites were. There were less, divisive issues on those sites. So we wanted to sort of get a head start on the committee and take in more feedback a little bit earlier than we have on previous town projects.
Gotcha. So these are all things that we're going to keep talking about for the months and years to come. So we'll leave that there for now. I want to talk about economic development, placemaking stuff. So first of all, before we get into the specifics, we are several years now from the depths of a really serious pandemic that really shook the economic fabric of the town. And in some ways it feels a little anachronistic to look back at the pandemic and say, where are we now? But I do think it's still relevant to how we're thinking about how we're using space, what our traffic patterns look like. So just briefly, what's your assessment of how we're doing in this new post-pandemic era?
I'm really proud. I think we have a very resilient business community. But I don't think, I don't think we're in the clear yet. There's still a lot of empty office buildings around town. We have a high density of office buildings. That's one of the most risky areas in commercial real estate right now. Everybody knows what's going on with office spaces. They're shrinking.
People working from home.
People working from home. If anything, what we've noticed over the past couple of years is companies would right-size their space, so they sort of shrink, but still maintain an office space. I do think that there has been a big push, particularly recently. I do think some companies have seen the value in their employees gathering together as opposed to just working from home. And I think more companies are moving towards a hybrid type environment where their employees come to work maybe 3 days a week and work from home 2 days a week. So that might be something that sticks for the future, which is a positive development from what I can see. But there's still a lot of office space in town.
Right.
So, a lot of the smaller companies where, they may not have the strong financial backing, they may be looking to continue to work from home as opposed to get office space. And it's a huge concern for us going forward, given the amount of office space that we have, just to make sure that we can keep our commercial sector vibrant, because we're really, as everybody knows, our budget is very dependent upon it. It's what makes the residents' tax bills lower than what tax bills are in neighboring communities. It's what helps fund our exceptional level of services that are provided. So we're very concerned about commercial real estate moving forward. And to that end, like I say, I know that you guys have seen the work that's being done on the 128 Mall Road redevelopment, just looking to ways to modernize what I would call our breadbasket and try to come up with modern ways to make those properties vibrant. There's clearly winners and losers in the office market, and those properties that are staying successful are the ones that can provide those amenities, that can provide areas where people can live nearby. And again, another area is just trying to improve, transportation networks so that people can get around town and get to town. One of the areas that we're really lacking in is public transportation here in Burlington. We're just sort of in a middle ground, Woburn has a train and Alewife that way. We're just sort of kind of stuck in the middle. We kind of have poor bus service, and there's a lot of concerns going forward. But at the same time, I think that the commercial sector here has shown its resiliency and has weathered the pandemic extremely well. But there's definitely storm clouds on the horizon, and it's just something that we focus a lot of time and attention on.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, the idea is that because we understand that there are some potential risks to our economy, to the economic vibrancy, if a sufficient number of companies decide to downsize their office space or get rid of their office space in town, in order to mitigate that, the idea is we're going to make places like Mall Road more diverse, with more live-work spaces, more parks, and more different kinds of activities, and that's going to make it such an attractive space for companies to locate that we won't lose as many. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, and I think we have a really good example. If you look at 3rd Avenue, any suburban community has a hesitancy about apartment buildings, right? Nobody moves to the suburbs and wants apartment buildings near their single-family home. But I think that, the town of Burlington has always done a really smart job with apartment buildings and using, residential component on these developments to liven up the commercial end of it. And I can tell you that even during the depths of the pandemic, that Third Avenue area was very lively. There's people walking the streets, there's people working in the buildings. You have the retail component with Wegmans, and it's a very livable, walkable neighborhood. And I think that we can create that experience at many locations in our commercial district to just, give them that vibrancy. If somebody wants to rent office space, they don't want to rent an office building in the middle of nowhere where there's no housing nearby, there's no amenities, that they can, our projects will look a lot more attractive when people are looking for space, because this is what we hear that companies are looking for. They don't want to be in an office building isolated. They want their employees want an opportunity to live near where they work to make life easier. And again, I'm very encouraged, like when I go to Third Avenue, even on a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, it's just a lively place. There's people walking around, almost like a city neighborhood down there. And I think that that's a result of the residential component that's been added into the complex.
Residential housing stuff is a big deal. It has been a big deal this year. It will continue to be a big deal. This year, actually no, I think it was last year, the Housing Needs Assessment Report came out. And essentially that's another report that told us what we already know, which is that we need more. And especially my recollection is the findings were, there's a missing middle, right? There's lower income housing that's accessible for young families, people who are just starting out in their careers, elderly folks who might want to move out of the family home and downsize a little bit. There's breaks in sort of the natural life cycle of the housing that a person or a family might want. And so I think what I'm hearing you saying is that part of this is rectifying that. What kinds of other conversations have you been having in town? What's the vibe around that? Those other parts of it, those duplexes, townhomes, those different kinds of housing.
Yeah, it's a tricky conversation. So I think that if you would characterize sort of our housing, we have a ton of single families, and then we have a lot of apartment buildings, larger apartment buildings. Unfortunately, the cost of land here is so expensive that it doesn't lend itself, if you look at some of the properties down on the Mall Road, it's difficult to get townhouse style developments on that land because it's just so expensive. And from a developer standpoint, there's really no incentive to build a 20-unit townhouse complex on extremely valuable land. It just doesn't work financially. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we're sort of dealing with, in that, so how do we integrate these different types of housing? Like I said, we've gotten some beautiful apartment buildings. They're larger, and they're less inviting, and there's a place for those, but we also want to try to do something in the middle, those smaller apartment style buildings or townhouses, the missing middle, as they say. And I know that it's, our planning director, Liz, is constantly working on that, and I think she has some ideas to present to the town in the future. But like I say, the cost of land makes it a pretty difficult proposition, because you can come up with the best idea possible, but if it's not financially viable from the property owner's standpoint, then how can you make that work?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting too. It's in the same conversation as the MSBA communities zoning law, which is asking us to rezone a portion of land that would be more amenable to that kind of development in transit accessible areas. I think there's a concern in the community, in the Massachusetts community, broad swath, that it's going to be a change to the feel of the community, that maybe these places that have been more suburban are going to start to feel more urban, and that's change. Do you think that concern is grounded? How do you think about what those changes could mean?
I think here in Burlington we're uniquely positioned to do both, right? If you consider the way the town, people that planned out the town many years ago were very thoughtful and had a lot of foresight. If you're in a residential neighborhood in Burlington, you feel like you're in a quintessential suburb. Yet right down the street, you have commercial areas where has a nice urban feel, and there's every amenity you could you could want. I think we can add housing to town and not impact the residential feel of the neighborhoods. I mean, I'm part of the generation that grew up in the city and was dying. I couldn't wait to move to the suburbs to get more space, to get a little bit of a yard, to get a driveway. So I totally understand the viewpoint of a resident that says, hey, I don't want apartment buildings in my neighborhood. You know, I moved here to get away from apartment buildings. But then again, I think that we also have a great opportunity here in Burlington that we have these commercial areas. I think the research has shown that these apartment buildings are not generating overwhelming amounts of school children to overwhelm the school system. And, I don't think that they've changed the nature and the character of the town at all. So I think that we can do both things. We can create housing in a smart way in our commercial areas and still maintain the completely suburban single-family feel that a lot of people moved here specifically for that reason.
Yeah.
So I think we can do both things.
Yeah. I mean, Paul, these are the kinds of things that just animate me, is thinking about who this is for, who communities are for, and who they serve, and how communities change over time. And I think one of the stories of this year, again, this is true across Massachusetts, is an influx of migrants and refugees that have been joining our community. Burlington, I don't think, has been impacted as much as some of our neighboring communities. You know this more than I do, but still, we've had folks who are living in our community, living in hotels, becoming part of our community in kind of a non-traditional way. How do they fit into the picture of how we're serving residents of our town?
Again, we've been minimally impacted. I'm not going to say there's no impact. Clearly there's an impact on schools, but I think this problem will figure itself out over time. And I guess the utopian goal would be for everybody to, find employment and then find a nice place to live and stick around town wherever they ended up and become a part of the larger community. I mean, it is difficult to integrate into the community if you're living into a hotel. It's got to be a really difficult situation just to sort of feel connected to everything. We talked about it earlier. We're pretty poorly served by the MBTA, so that doesn't help matters either. But we're hopeful that they're having a good experience, and that at some point, hopefully they'll integrate into the community in more traditional ways.
Yeah. So we hit the main buckets of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about. Now we're getting into what I like to call miscellaneous hour. So this is the other stuff. Beer gardens, fun stuff, activities around town. Melissa Tentakalis, our economic development director, has been around for a couple of years now, and I think this was a really successful year for her projects. I think the beer garden was the most obvious one that most people partook in. What's your assessment? What's your characterization of that, like, local, smaller business, human-to-human side of the economic development work that's happening?
Well, clearly, I mean, that's just a small amount of what Melissa does on a daily basis. I mean, she's a dynamo. I think, when I leave here, I think that will probably be my greatest accomplishment is creating that position and, hiring her. I think she's just been tremendous for the town, and I just think the beer gardens just happen to be one of the more visible ways because it's such a fun event and so many people have taken to it, and I'm sure you've been down there a few times, and the community that is hanging out down there and just enjoying each other and enjoying being in Burlington, and families and dogs and entertainment. It really is a spectacular vibe, and I haven't met one person who hasn't thought that it was a wonderful idea. And everybody's having so much fun. It's growing exponentially. And, the real purpose of it is to bring people to the town center, open their eyes to all the great businesses we have down there. We've received really positive feedback from the businesses, and, that's an important part of it. We're just really lucky that the beer gardens, in addition to being placemaking in the town center and bringing people to the town center to see the businesses, they've really turned into to great community events as well. So, not all projects work out that way where, it turns into a great community event, but it's still serving a real business purpose of sort of helping the businesses in that area.
Yeah, definitely. There is that vibrancy for sure. But I also want to ask, essentially not every, I shouldn't say that, many government meetings that I cover, I've heard the select board talk about some of the challenges with finding volunteers, whether that's for the 4th of July committee, other sort of things that pop up. How big of a deal is that? Has that been getting worse over time, getting better over time?
It's way worse. Again, I'm sympathetic to the plight of people in the community.
A lot going on. Everyone's busy.
Everybody is busy and everybody's working hard, and there are more demands than ever on young families. So it's not, it's understandable how we got here. People just don't have time for these types of volunteer commitments, and I think it really hurts us in that we end up with the same folks volunteering for everything. But again, which is great, we have some extremely, I would call them professional volunteers that are on boards, committees, they attend public meetings. We have some really dedicated people in town. But sometimes I feel like there's a missing demographic. So, those folks tend to be, a particular age group. Maybe their children are grown, maybe they're, on the way to retirement. And I think we miss out on having different viewpoints, maybe from younger families, because they're the busiest of all people.
Yeah.
And again, I think it sort of skews the viewpoint of the town, in that it's a particular type of folks that have the ability to volunteer, as opposed to sort of a broad section. But just the lack of volunteers is something that many towns are experiencing, but it just seems like over the past few years, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
Is there a solution, or is it just like, well, we got to do with what we can?
I tend to think that these things just sort of go in cycles, and I'm just hopeful that there'll be a time, or there'll be an issue that someone will get involved on some committee, just maybe even because they're mad about something, and then just say, hey,
classic reason to get involved.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reason why a lot of people start getting involved, is they're upset about a decision that was made, and they start attending meetings, and they say, hey, this is pretty good. You can have a say in your local government and provide your opinion. And like I say, we have so many, they're practically professional volunteers. If you've seen the same faces around, they participate in everything. They work really hard on behalf of the town. It would just be nice to attract a broader cross-section of the town. And again, completely respectful of the residents. They have extremely busy lives, so I can only imagine how difficult it must be raising children and, working all day and then running out of the house for a meeting, for a few hours. It's a really difficult ask for people in today's day and age.
Relatedly, last year, 12 months ago, you sat here, in our other studio, and talked to Phil about one of the most serious challenges that the town was facing was that people don't know about or aren't committed to jobs in municipal government. So this is not volunteer positions. This is your hired roles in town governance. 12 months later, are we better? Are we worse? Same situation.
I would say same, getting worse. Again, it's just no young person wakes up and says, "Hey, I want to be a conservation director, or I want to be a DPW foreman, or things like that." Folks sort of fall into those jobs over time, or when they go to college and they end up in a particular interest. But the bench of young people going into these professions is not existent now. And unfortunately, like in all industries, there's a huge number of people that are retiring and they're wrapping up their careers, and there's just not those employees that were waiting in the wings ready to take over these roles and responsibilities. There's no town hall government position degrees in colleges or anything like that. If you're I'll use conservation as an example, but if you're interested in environmental issues, sometimes you go into that, you work for an environmental engineering firm or something like that, and then you say, hey, the towns have conservation departments. That's a pretty cool gig. Yeah. And sometimes you fall into it. I was one of those, from the accounting end of things. And it's a serious problem across the state. So this town in particular, we're a very complicated town. We're a small town with a big city commercial district. So our department heads are phenomenal. And I truly worry about the future of that, because this isn't, a small residential community. It's a very complicated town, and we really need to continue to hire the best of the best. And in many cases, it's not the best of the best. It's there are no people out there anymore for some of these fields. Building inspectors, public health nurses. They've been trying to hire one for a couple years now. And again, private sector jobs, you don't necessarily have to run every decision by the public too. So that keeps some people out of this business.
Right.
That you have a project and okay, we got to go to 50 committee meetings before we get the project approved, even if you know it's the right project and you understand that that's what local government is, and it's what makes these jobs great too, is having to deal with the people. But sometimes that can be a little bit of an obstruction. And if you're a great engineer, you can do it here, or you can say, all right, well, I can go work for that company and be an engineer and not have to deal with any of this aspect of the job. So it takes a special kind of person. You really got to love what you do to work in local government, and those folks are becoming harder to find.
Okay, we're coming up on our last section here, so our last couple of minutes, Paul. I want to look forward to 2024. Couple of big things that are coming up. One is 225th anniversary in February of next year. What do we know? What's going to happen? What can we look forward to?
Nothing.
Oh no!
I know the town clerk, Amy Warfield's going to have
I think there's going to be a
cake.
Yes.
225 is a little bit of a kind of a weird year. But at the same time, getting back to the volunteers, that's just sort of something that's fallen by the wayside too. If you look back at the town's 200th celebration, 25 years ago.
Seen some of the footage.
It was wild.
Yeah.
It was like 50 or 75 dedicated people that worked for years to put together all the events. And, I think we rousted up 2 or 3 people to be on the committee.
So maybe this time we'll have some cake. We'll enjoy the celebration, and then we'll work on getting people together for the 250th.
It's gonna be it's gonna be birthday celebration light. I think the select board had a couple of ideas where we want to sort of integrate Burlington's 225th into a lot of pre-existing events, whether it's Celebrate Burlington, 4th of July parade. That might be a way to sort of acknowledge the town's birthday without needing a mass of volunteers to plan and raise money and organize. So I think that it's important to note these milestones, but I think we have to be cognizant that it's really not important to a lot of people like it was a generation ago. It was a big deal in any community when you had these type of milestones. Like I say, we advertised it, we got it out there, and we've received pretty limited interest in it. So I think that the celebration will be relatively limited, but I do think we'll take every opportunity we can to acknowledge the birthday, and hopefully integrate it in a lot of other things. Maybe a 225th birthday party at a beer garden next
there
fall.
You go.
So it'll be things like that.
Okay. This is another one where it's like we've been talking this hour about how things in municipal government happen on a different time scale. So maybe this is not a fair question, but 12 months from now, in December of 2024, what progress do you hope or expect to have been made in some of these efforts that we're working on now? The schools, the DPW stuff, what's going to be different in a year? Or will it just be we're just chugging along?
I like to think that we just be chugging along. Like I say, these projects are pretty complicated and take a long time to roll out. So, once we get the approval from the MSBA, then they'll start actually designing the school. Once we get approval from town meeting for the police station, they'll actually start putting together the architectural plans and getting all that stuff tightened out. And as you know, everything has to go out to bid. So it's a long, complicated process, but that's typical of government construction. And I anticipate that we'll be moving along. We'll be sort of well into it a year from now, I would hope.
Cool. Okay. Final question. I have a horrible habit of saying final question, then having another question after that, but I'm going to try. If you could get one thing done, or one thing that you really wish you could get done in the next 12 months, what would it be?
For me, it's really, I would love to see the police station funded. Everybody talks about the condition of the building, and I feel that we have the best police department in the state. They're the best trained, best performing. We got the the best chief and best administration and the best officers. Like I can't tell you how overwhelmed I am with how great they are on a daily basis, and I think that that's a really important project for the town. These folks have been, I don't want to say suffering at the time when they chose.
Sounds like they're
when they chose to move there back in, whatever, it was considered a big upgrade over where they were. But clearly it was, probably in retrospect, wasn't a great decision at that time. It was a little bit short-sighted. When you have a building that's built as a school, to try to use it for something else is, to try to use a building built for one purpose for a different purpose, almost never works out well. So, that would be my goal, is to hopefully have the project approved and funded and on its way 12 months from now, and that would make me extremely happy.
Okay. Well, much to come. Lots happened this year, and lots will continue to happen in the future. I'm so grateful for your time. I know it's a big ask to come and run through all these different topics, so I appreciate your willingness to come in and chat about it. This has been a year in review with BCAT. I'm Sydney Boles, here with Paul Sagarino. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sydney. I appreciate it.
And thanks at home for watching.